So colleagues, welcome. I'm Damien Page, I'm Deputy Vice-Chancellor. So it's an honour to be here today to introduce the inaugural lecture of Professor SriKartini Leet, an exceptional artist, photographer and the Head of School of Art, Design and Performance at Buckinghamshire University. Professor Leet embarked on a journey at BNU in 2017, assuming the role of Head of Department of Art and Design and later taking the helm as Head of School in 2018. During her tenure, there have been significant strides in academic achievements, evident in the notable rise in rankings for various courses within the Art and Design Department, as highlighted in the Guardian Education Guide 2020. For example, fashion and textiles surged 26 places, securing the top spot in London and the South East, while design studies attained a commendable second position in the region and 8th nationally. Beyond her impactful leadership in academia, Professor Leet's scholarly contributions extend to the realm of photography, where she combines practice and theory in her research pursuits. Her expertise has led to the publication of books and articles, along with receiving grants and commissions for community-oriented photography projects. Notably, her research delves into pedagogical explorations, particularly in online platforms and digital approaches to practical education delivery. In addition, in 2022, Professor Leet assumed the role of the university's Lead for Culture, playing a pivotal role in shaping the arts and cultural landscapes of the county. Her diverse contributions have not only furthered the university's civic agenda, but have also fostered a more vibrant and inclusive cultural environment. Today, Professor Leet's appointment by Amersham Museum marks a continuation of her legacy as an advocate for art and community engagement. Her dedication to capturing the narratives and cultural richness of Amersham residents aligns seamlessly with her commitment to fostering diverse perspectives and histories through visual storytelling. The forthcoming exhibition promises to reflect her profound impact within the town's cultural heritage. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor SriKartini Leet.
Thank you, Damien. I do want to start by thanking you for making the time to be here today, and also to thank Florin, Jackie, Kate in the research office, Lindsay and the events team who has done a lot to put this event together, Pete and the creative team as well for his help and support in designing the booklets and for making this event a possibility. And of course, all the members of UT and the professoriate for all their support. So I'm hoping to keep this nice and sweet and short. I'll speak for about 40 minutes and then open the floor to some questions. So my lecture today will set out some of the key themes that have informed my work, and they will be broadly organized into the following sections. The first, identity, its classification and representation. And this is where I'll be discussing some of the histories of photography and its use in visual anthropology. Ideas of home and its visual representation, where the space of the physical home also features prominently. I'll also be discussing the community-engaged projects that I've been involved with and participatory practice in a much broader sense. And since this is an inaugural lecture after all, while discussing these topics, I will segue into aspects of my own background and experience which has informed and influenced my work. So as the history of photography indicates, the photograph was thought of as a mechanical reproduction of the real world that's independent of all man-made interventions. When it was first invented, photography very quickly became a symbol for scientific achievement and was increasingly used to control and classify both man and nature. The medium allegedly provided very truthful evidence of prevailing attitudes, and this desire to classify and categorize was an integral part of the new science of anthropology. When photography was first introduced in 1839, it very quickly assumed an important role in scientific investigations of the other. It was both the perception of the other and the expansion of colonialism that caused the proliferation of photographic images from exotic and distant lands. This photograph here is from the Royal Anthropological Institute in London, and it depicts a form of anthropometry, which is a 19th century system of categorizing individuals based purely on their racial and physical characteristics. It's a process of mapping cultures through physiognomy, and this was essentially a form of imperial power. Anthropology can be seen as an invention of the investigation of the non-Western other by Western anthropologists, and this use of photography in a pseudo-scientific way is similar to one of the earliest uses of photography by the state in its scientific applications and the record and classification of criminals by the police and identification photography. So having looked at this example, there are a few more examples here by John Lamprey, where we have the Chinese male and examples of the Malayan male. As you can see in all these examples, the people featured in the photographs are often disrobed. They're all nude. Sometimes you get them as partially nude subjects. And the way in which the images are framed, the intention there is to present these people or portray these subjects as specimens rather than living human beings. You'll notice as well in the background there are these grid lines, and you'll get a glimpse of that just up here. It's essentially a wooden frame that anthropologists would build, and these are threads or strings to create almost a kind of pseudoscientific grid to measure the subject that's standing in front of it. So they would place that behind each of these subjects. So according to John Tagg and Victor Bergen, the history of photography and the practice of anthropology have tended to repress and they conceal the process of production by effacing the presence of the photographer and the anthropologist. Therefore, the ideological nature of the representation remains hidden, and dominant social relations are constantly reproduced and reinforced through the act of photographing these people who do not have the means to represent themselves. And anthropology often provided the institutional authority to differentiate them as others and to justify their unequal status. In this very famous quote by Susan Sontag on photography, she describes the camera as a weapon with which we can shoot the exotic and bring home a two-dimensional trophy. As she states, there's something predatory in the act of taking a picture, and that we violate these people by seeing them as they never see themselves, and to turn people into objects that can be possessed. Okay, the next couple of examples are again of early uses of photography by people in medical professions who use the photograph as a form of documentary evidence. And this here is of people within a mental asylum. So they photograph people with mental illnesses, individuals who suffer from tuberculosis and various other ailments. And in one sense, they were selecting almost individuals or classes of people that they felt were socially inferior. Okay, so this is a series by Dr. Hugh Diamond, and it's from a series called Portraits of the Insane, where he photographed, he was a doctor, a psychiatrist, but also a photographer. And he would photograph his subjects in various states of their mental illness. And however, when you look at his full records, they aren't often subtitled in any way, so there wasn't a kind of a real substance, I would say, to the images, other than looking at them being portrayed as mad people. And because of the nature of photography at that time, and the technology required long exposures, so you would require, what, a 20-second exposure where you have to stay still without it being blurred. Quite often these pictures are actually posed for in that the doctor would advise the patient how to look for the picture. So it was constructed at that level. And I mean, I don't know whether you can see from there, but the majority of the individuals who are deemed mad are female. Indeed, in the 19th and 20th centuries, in mental asylums, the biggest proportion of the occupants would be female, because they were deemed to suffer from all sorts of mental illness, from religious obsession to hysteria. And in fact, I think it reflected part of the wider society's oppression of women at the time, and the asylums were simply the space where they would lock away people that didn't fit with the social norm. But again, you know, it's an example of how photography was so easily used as a mode or a tool of power to you know, place people in particular boxes. And these two examples are by Henry Herring: Acute Melancholia, Father and Son, and Acute Mania here. And I just love that picture because it looks like two actors looking really depressed. But of course, they're meant to be scientific records of you know, mental illness. So these physiognomic projects by Alphonse Bertillon and Francis Galton, these are two photographers I'm introducing as well, they're also linked to the police. So what they used photography for was to identify different criminal types in order to define the concept of the other. And their work concentrated on Adolphe Quetelet's notion of the average man. Note that the average man is essentially the average white male. So everyone else was measured against this white male. And you might not recognize the name, but Quetelet is the person who invented the BMI, do you know, the body mass index scale. It used to be called the Quetelet's index, but that's essentially the person who, I guess, used scientific means to justify particular beliefs. So both Bertillon and Gaston contributed to the whole creation of a very generalized, standardized ideal. Positivism is a philosophical approach that is based on the assumption that all things can be solved through science, and this quickly led to the ideas of phrenology and physiognomy. Phrenology is the study of the shape and the physical features of the skull and the head, in that the shape of your skull can determine particular character traits, or that was what the belief was. And physiognomy, of course, is to do with facial features and expressions, and how these can dictate or identify ethnic origins and particular personality traits as well. So Alphonse Bertillon was a French officer, but he was also a biometrics researcher who applied anthropometry to law enforcement. So he created criminal types, essentially, by photographing them and also measuring particular physical features on their face. And he was trying to almost create a means or an index through which he could identify, say, a thief or someone who was a pickpocket based on the size of their body parts. Bertillon was also the individual who invented the mugshot that you're probably quite familiar with now. But it's something he started and standardized only in 1888. But if you think, photography essentially was technically invented in 1839. By the early 1840s, which is a few years later, the police had already started using the camera as a tool of state control. So they started mapping criminals and certain social deviants. So that's an example from Bertillon where you get close-up shots of the ears because he studied all the individual parts and felt that he could churn out, to spot someone on the street and gauge their propensity to commit a certain type of crime. And Francis Galton here, who is known for his work surrounding the eugenics movement that sought to identify and maintain a type of human that had optimal genetics compared to others. So whilst Galton photographed individuals in terms of frontal and profile portraits, Galton used a different method. He would essentially pull in a bunch of people who fulfilled his types. Again, people that he felt were socially inferior or who were social deviants. And he would photograph all these people onto one glass plate. Okay, so that's why they look a bit blurry, because he's actually photographed more than one person into one frame. And he felt that by doing that, he could then determine particular physical characteristics that define these people. Of course, he didn't stop at criminals. He would pick people who were mentally ill, and he also, target other people, other ethnic origins. And here we've got the Jewish type, where he's done a whole series around Jewish people. And he then went on later on to create a whole library, I would say, of what he felt were talented and healthy people. So he would pull in businessmen, people from Royal Engineers, Westminster schoolboys, that sort of thing, to then photograph. So he was essentially creating these physical types. And this mapping was always based on the centering of the white male at its core, against which all other people were measured. So these early archive photographs became the subjects of what are now recognizable as a series of discourses surrounding racial and social discrimination, in which the photographs supply the evidence for supposed ethnic and criminal typologies. And the contents of these photographs were interpreted in unquestioned ways. Because of the photograph's claim to veracity, the proof that it provided always legitimized such beliefs. This example here is from Life magazine, and it's dated 22nd December 1941, roughly 2 weeks after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. So what was happening at ground level was that the American people were taking it out on anyone who looked Oriental, and the local Chinese were getting beaten up unnecessarily because they were mistaken for Japanese people. So Life magazine published this article to help their patriotic Americans distinguish, quote, between these friendly Chinese from these enemy alien Japanese. You can see how they pointed out particular physical traits between the Chinese person at the top and the Japanese man at the bottom there. And I pulled out a quote from the small text there. An often sounder clue is facial expression shaped by cultural and anthropological factors. Chinese wear rational calm of tolerant realists. Japs like General Tojo, that's the guy there, show humorless intensity of ruthless mystics. So even in terms of the language they pick to describe these people, there's obviously a current of sentiment against Japanese people, but they tie it back to being able to physically identify them through that link to, the anthropology. So the inherent problem with any photographic image, and most recently in debates around historiography, is that the information is always transmitted to its audience via an author. In this sense, although it may have been widely believed that due to its mechanical nature, the camera cannot lie, and that the photographer was always a non-interfering observer, not everyone takes the same picture of the same thing. So photographs are not simply records of events, but an evaluation of the world. And every photograph, in any context that you look at it, it's actually been collected and published and circulated, and prior to that, they've been selected by the photographer or dictated by curators, archivists, picture editors, and also market concerns. So what you see has quite likely been taken out of context or been pre-selected. In the last decade of the 20th century, attention has shifted to incorporate the increasingly important role of photographers whose origins are situated outside the Western canon, what Sunil Gupta refers to as a kind of new internationalism. Photographers from regions such as Africa, Asia, South America, who are previously marginalized by the dominant mainstream, have begun to challenge the way that identities and cultures are conventionally represented, with some of them responding specifically to their positions as post-colonial subjects. And they disrupt conventional stereotypes and attempt to reclaim their identities. Even the mainstream institutions of art have to some extent responded to this problematic of difference and marginality by incorporating art and photography made by the other, and it's a shift which reflects the need to make visible groups of artists and social and political themes that have been excluded from the Western canon. These interventions position historically marginalized subjects as important producers of images and highlights their attempts to innovate established structures of representation. So I've said quite a lot so far about the other and how the otherness is framed within photography historically. And I wanted to almost take a pause and reflect on this in terms of my own background, my own origins, and how that's in many ways influenced my interest in the subject. So I was born in, and that's a picture of my beautiful parents there. I was born in Singapore, which was under British rule for about 144 years. And I mean, it's made up of largely 3/4 Chinese people, and then there are Malays and also Indians. And whilst it's known widely today as being a kind of cultural melting pot of the world, it certainly wasn't the case in the 70s and 80s, where essentially interracial marriage was regarded as taboo. It wasn't illegal, but it was totally socially unacceptable to be married to someone who wasn't of your same race. So of course my parents, my father is a second generation Chinese person, second generation migrant from China, and he lived in Malaysia. And my mum is a second-generation migrant from India, and she lived in Singapore. So, and please don't balk at this. That's me with my real hair, without the straightening. Yeah, so I inherited my mum's curly hair, whereas my two brothers and my sister had the straight hair. And so at school, it was difficult at school because in the 70s and 80s, when you filled up an official document to say what race you are, they ask you this all the time. There'll be a box for Chinese, you tick one box and you can't tick two, Chinese, Indian, Malay, and it used to be none of the above, which is what I used to tick, and then it changed to other, so I used to tick the other box. Because that was probably what I almost identified with, if they didn't allow me to tick two. But on my official identity card, when my parents registered my birth and so on, I had to be named one race only, so my father put down Chinese. And I didn't look very Chinese to the rest of the Chinese population. So, and he wanted me to learn Mandarin as well as a second language. And later on I did study German as a third. And I have to say I probably felt more at home studying German as a third language than studying Mandarin as a second, because I probably wasn't made to feel like an alien in my own classroom. So from the first day in primary school, it was fine in the shared classes, but the minute we hit second language, I used to dread it because you just wait for that, that look from the teacher as she walks in and notices this person who's probably not the right skin color, hair's a bit too curly, what the hell is this doing? And I'll get dragged from one room to another. They actually called me in Mandarin, they called me a mongrel because there was nobody else who was almost like mixed breed. So it was just a really strange process that one went to, but I eventually got used to it, and as I went through the years, people in the school knew me anyway, so it sort of stopped, or at least they stopped trying to throw me out of the class, because even though I didn't look Chinese, I had really good grades in Mandarin, so they kind of left me alone. And I think what made it a little bit more complicated as well was that my father considered himself a Muslim. It's quite rare in that region to be Chinese and a Muslim, but that's what he was. And my mum grew up in a Hindu household, and the entire family became Catholics when she was quite young. So there was a real sort of strange sort of tension there in terms of religion. But I guess none of us were hugely religious, so it didn't make things too difficult. But at an official level, when I had to report at school what religion I was, it just made things really, really difficult for me, because I was given, unfortunately, an award for Muslim scholars, and I felt like a complete imposter, especially during Ramadan, where everyone else was fasting, and I would hide in the toilets to eat my lunch because I didn't want to be found out that I wasn't actually Muslim. So it was really, tricky. And of course, I met my husband. Some of you close pals in the room would have met him anyway. He's born in the Turkish part of Iran and made his escape many years ago during the Iran-Iraq war, and got here. For many years, from the time I knew him, I'd never seen he didn't have a passport, an identity document that said nationality uncertain, with a kind of aliens registration office stamp on his face. So, eventually, of course, he got his British passport, but it was, I guess, a strange scenario where I guess I felt almost drawn to people from no man's land, if you like, So, and I just love this quote from Salman Rushdie's Imaginary Homelands about, the whole relationship we have to the past and how the photograph features within it. So, the fact that because of my own migrant background, the concept of home bears particular significance. In much of my work, in many of my projects, the whole idea of home features centrally, because it's something that it is indeterminate, it can't be pinned down really, really easily, and it can be referred to something that has been a place that's been left behind, or to which a place that someone returns to, or even if you're on holiday, it's a place that you temporarily take up, the hotel room. So it could be a very, a deeply familiar place or a foreign place, or simply be a passing point of reference. And I think everyone has their own sort of subjective relationship with it. John Collier speaks about the physical home, so the inside of your houses or your flats, and that he says that its look shows a significant relationship to the way that individuals or the family is coping with the problems of life. Ruish and Keyes also state that the presence and use of objects in the home relates to the psychological makeup of the occupants. So this is particularly true in interiors where the nature of and arrangement of possessions say a great deal about the owner's views of their existence. When I was at Goldsmiths doing my master's in photography, I took on a project around ideas of the home, and it entailed me knocking on doors of strangers' houses, and it had to be strangers' houses. I didn't photograph houses of people I knew, and I asked for permission, and I photographed them. And this was both in the UK and abroad, wherever I traveled to. And one example of this was a woman I stayed with, actually, in Bratislava in the Slovak Republic. She lived on her own, and all she wanted to do was migrate to America. That was like her wonderful golden dream. And in her house, she had framed photographs of George Bush Sr. and Marlboro, adverts, posters in all over her house, like on the walls. And the most disturbing part of it, she had a giant fish tank that was empty, which she turned into a wishing well. So she would throw a coin into it, I don't know, every day or whenever there's a chunk of coins in there, about wanting to go eventually to America. And at the back of this tank was a photograph of David Hasselhoff. Okay? And she was like a big fan, and that was part of the reason. I think she must have watched Baywatch or whatever, and she, all she wanted to do was go associate David Hasselhoff with, all these, I guess, popular ideas of what America was about. And I extended this project through my PhD, where I photographed the homes of refugees in London, because I was really interested in not just in that kind of in-between culture, but the way in which we map our spaces based on who we are. And in particular with, for refugees, because they tend to leave their countries in a hurry and they're fleeing something, they don't bring very much with them. And, when I did my PhD, it was just, 20, I started 24 years ago, so it's been a while. I was using analog film, of course, and it was before the days where we had mobile phones. So if in probably 9 times out of 10, the refugees I meet, if you say, what did you bring with you when you fled, because they run in a hurry, they will bring with them a bag of photographs, okay, and it's all tied in plastic bags, and it's because those were the most valuable things for them. So the home can be thought of as a kind of microcosm of each individual's universe, and the setup of the home represents the mindset of all its inhabitants. As the quote there says, home is the place from which everything is mapped, and according to John Berger, it's seen as the center of the world, a secure and familiar place, where one can be recognized by others. So there exists a clear opposition here between the concept of the home and the existence of the refugee, where the site of stability exists on one hand versus, a series of instabilities and homelessness. Whether it is the food we eat, the clothes we wear, our customs or rituals we maintain, we live in what Homi Bhabha described as conditions of hybridity. For anyone in here who's had in one way or another been displaced from an original place where we once perhaps belonged, home can never really exist either here or there. Rather, it is a hybrid, and it becomes a mixture, even a performance of a past self that is being reconstituted. One of the houses I visited is a flat in Edgware in London. It was a young woman who from Kurdistan. Of course, that's also an imaginary non-territory. Kurdistan exists between Turkey, Iran, Syria, and Iraq, and it's a really sort of mountainous landscape. And Mina was her name. She lived there with her husband and a very young toddler. On her walls in the living room, she had a gigantic framed, of course, as a print, Constable's Hay Wain. Dated 1821, painted in 1821, and it's meant to be the archetypal English landscape of England. And I asked her, I said, why did you put that on the wall? And she said because she went to the local market and she felt this is what she dreamed England was all about. And I sort of looked out the window, I was like, all this traffic and grime, and in this really rough, noisy city. But for her, that was what she felt England was all about. And of course, above the picture of the hay wain, she had a little framed photograph. And these were two AK-47 Kalashnikov rifles that were propped up like that next to her wedding picture. Mina was a Peshmerga, which is a freedom fighter. And so she would operate a gun. She was even trying to demonstrate to me how one would do it. And also a radio, she was like a radio specialist. She was in charge of making those radio communications. And she did say to me that when she came to the UK, even though she felt that her life was no longer under threat, she felt she did not have an identity in this country, whereas before she had a purpose to live. So, it was just a really strange combination of, objects and images that she related to. So the structure of a refugee's home becomes a symbol of his or her journey. Homi Bhabha, in his book, The Location of Culture, speaks of the double frame of the diasporic aesthetic. The migrant desires both repetition and difference, and the migrant home therefore combines the experience of novelty, something that's new, and of course familiarity, something that they can identify and return to. The nation, according to Benedict Anderson, is an imagined community. So the home too, therefore, might be thought of as an enacted space within which we play out our roles and relationships to both belonging and foreignness. So Alan Secular states that there are all kinds of photographic archives, from commercial archives to corporate ones, government archives, museum archives, and so on, as well as family archives and personal collections. All of these are historically regarded as repositories of, official documents and facts, and what's associated with them are ideas of impartiality, neutrality, and objectivity. People trusted it. This was the source of all knowledge. But both Alan Secular and John Tagg raised the notion that institutions are tied to the workings of power. As they say in that quote there, archives are not neutral, but rather embody the power inherent in accumulation, collection, and hoarding. In historical uses of the archives, the processes of selection and interpretation remain invisible. And this view is, of course, reinforced by Joan Schwartz and Terry Cook, who state that through archives, the past is controlled because only certain stories are privileged, whereas others are marginalized. So archives are therefore, not these sort of neutral sources of knowledge. They should be thought of as active sites where social power is negotiated, contested, and confirmed. So in recent decades, many artists have actually questioned the whole authority of the traditional archive. And in fact, they've, adopted the format of archiving in order to question the way in which knowledge is framed. And these alternative approaches to archiving suggest that the archive can be seen as a tool for the work of collective memory rather than mere data storage. I'm not expecting you to read the full quote, but that bit there in bold, okay, and this is from Joke Brower and Arjun Mulder's Information is Alive. They make a very clear distinction between the tradition of archives that are stiff and stable, the old official archive versus the tradition of new, flexible, and unstable archives. And what they say creates a fuzzy logic, and it's in this fuzzy logic, whether it's part of oral culture where you share stories or through personal subjective interpretations of photographs, that you actually create a much more accurate and democratic view of a particular topic or a particular place. And this leads me on to the fact that it's through the opening up of the archive to embrace the voices of many and the collective and the community rather than it coming from a single source or especially a single source of power, is where arts practices linked to the archive is heading. So issues surrounding cultural identity and contemporary arts practice has generated a simultaneous increased interest in anthropology. This is because anthropology has for a long time served as a tool for understanding otherness and is therefore vital in discussions around post-colonial issues when questioning its essential Western ideology. So the foundations of photographic representation and knowledge production are increasingly being questioned and contested from a diversity of perspectives. With postmodernism came post-truth and the understanding that there isn't one universal truth with a capital T, but a range of voices and perspectives. So there have been widespread calls, therefore, for more participatory, horizontal, and democratic approaches. So I'm going to jump in now with a whole series of different examples, and I'll shoot through, quickly some of them. This is the first project that I undertook with Photo Wings. So it's called I Dream of Home, and it was done at my previous institution, the University of Northampton. And the project was jointly funded by Ashoka U, which represents a global network of universities and colleges, which are changemaker campuses or essentially sites for social innovation. And of course, California-based Photo Wings, which is an organization which supports photographic practice and education, particularly in a social or community-based context. Photo Wings promotes the idea of using photography as a tool for social change. So the key criteria for this international award, they awarded 8 of these awards internationally, and I was one of them, was that it had to be done or involve individuals from an Ashoka campus, and that it had to be committed to engaging the community in contemplating, the title's up there, their past, present, and future self through photography. So my work, this is at Northampton in the gallery there, and it's only part of the exhibition because it runs all the way around. And there were over 90 people who were photographed for this project. This work was exhibited not just in the gallery here, but in Brown University at Rhode Island in America. And I also delivered a paper on the subject for actually the Royal Anthropological Institute conference at the British Museum in London. So what I did for this project was I asked individuals, anyone who was working at the university or was a student at the university, had any sort of relationship with the place, from porters to cleaners to the vice-chancellor to colleagues, everyone. And I would photograph them in the studio. And all this was done with a digital medium format camera. And I would ask every one of them to actually go away to contemplate what they felt was an image that conveyed their sense of home or a place that they belong to. And I guess I reminded them about the fact that the home may not be a physical place. It might be a place of the imagination, of fantasy. It can be something that's linked to their philosophy of life. So we had a whole range of different contributions which were so exciting. And I also asked them to write a piece of text about the picture. I'm afraid you can't see it from that side because this was, I guess, how it appeared in my digital portfolio, where they actually talk about the image itself. And this is an individual who, actually one of my ex-students who was a captain of British Airways, he was a pilot, retired from being a pilot and came on to do photography, and he was stunningly good. But he contributed this image of his family having a picnic in Kenya, where he grew up in Africa. And here, this is the example I used in the little leaflet, Jumai talking about her connection to Lokoja in Nigeria because many of her family members are buried there. So we have a whole range here. I mean, I'm not showing you all of them. Some of you recognize Fritz Friedemann. He's a well-known product designer who's from the Black Forest in Germany. And he, and they can approach it in whichever way they want. And I could see how invested some of these people were in finding bits of poetry, bits of text to actually, feel that connection, I would say, with the particular image. And here, a colleague who was from Italy. This person actually cried when I took his photograph because I was asking him to talk about what he would donate, and the whole story is about his mum making lasagna, and he was thinking of his mum, and he actually cried. So, which was strange, really, but I remembered it because out of everyone, he was getting very emotional with it. And that's Jane, love her to bits, one of my deans, and it was very clear that in her particular choice, she showed an aerial photograph that was made by an estate agent. So she thought of the home as almost a kind of property lines. And I thought it really reflected the kind of individual that she was. So in terms of that picture, they can either make a new one or they can find something from the old archives. And this is some IT guy who saw in the local landscape, related it to writers and poets that he absolutely liked. And the next project I did 2 years later was around Irish migration. PhotoWings felt it was such a successful project to start off with I Dream of Home, that they then funded me again and wanted me to work with Dublin University in a kind of collaborative way. And I did some research and found that there was a very large Irish migrant population in Northampton. And most importantly, I also read up on all the profiles of the community there and found that there was a disproportionately large number of Irish people who suffered from dementia. They couldn't explain it. They haven't yet scientifically or medically worked out why, but it was something I was trying to do with the community. So this was going to be, this was an intergenerational project that involved not just the grandparents, but also the parents and the children in terms of their experience of migration and how they would pass that, I guess, those narratives on from one generation to the next. So it involved taking photographs of them in their homes. Well, actually, in all of these participatory projects, quite often, not for the first one because I worked there, I would actually try to find someone, a community connector, because you need someone on the inside to actually support you with this. And so I interviewed them. It was all filmed and recorded, so we have video footage by a colleague from Film and TV who was very kind to work with me on this. And also pictures of their homes. And most importantly, this was the main part of the project. I wanted them to construct their own memory boxes, because a colleague of mine had told me about her mother who was suffering from dementia, and she was in a home in Bournemouth, and that on the outside of the doors of these homes, because people with dementia can't remember what they did yesterday, but they can remember something from 60 years ago. They don't have room numbers because they forget. People come out and they get lost. They can't work their way back to the room if they put numbers. So the care home had actually asked for relatives and family members to donate an object that these people remember from their childhood. So my friend actually brought along a toothbrush that belonged to her, and that's how her mum recognized that that's the place that she needs to go into. So I thought, in a similar vein, I wanted these people to fill their own sort of memory boxes to describe their journey of migration. And some of them, you probably can't see it from a shot like this, but they even had the original ferry ticket from the 1950s when they took the ferry from Ireland to England, and they had particular significance for them. So I photographed all of that, and we made these boxes together, which, they shared through their generations. And these are the things I lugged to Dublin when I shared the work at a conference there. Okay, so the last bit here, Amersham Roots, which is the most recent project. I was commissioned by Arts Council, Essex Cultural Diversity Group, Farnham Maltings, and Rothschild Foundation to undertake a project for Amersham Museum. It was their 30th anniversary, and they wanted to encourage people of the younger generation to visit the museum. They felt visitor numbers, especially from the younger age group, were not turning up anymore to the museum. And so I had to target people between 16 and 30 years old. I photographed them in their own personal spaces, so they get to choose which room in their house they wanted it photographed in. And again, they had to contribute something, an image of Amersham, and talk about why that particular thing is significant to them. Alongside that, these pictures there, which are also from the gallery, I worked with colleagues here and also our students. I hired our students to run workshops for members of the public. So we went around with a map and 3 words to photograph anything, on this trail that we created around Amersham, and that's the kind of the products of the show. So we see some examples here. Ben, saw him last night at the Impact Awards. Sasha, actually, he's one of our marketing guys, Ben Adipoju. And so I went to his house, took a series of photographs, and basically went with his suggestion of where his favorite place was, where he loved to sit. So I went with that image. And this is something he contributed, and the words that say why. That's Jessica, who was the youngest participant, and she was 16 years old. I also tried to, of course, with participatory projects, it's so important to encompass as diverse a group as possible. So I also worked with a school for kids or people with special needs, and because of they couldn't be photographed in their own homes for ethical and safety reasons, I photographed them in the school itself. So this chap here, I was just really impressed. He's memorized every single station name, on the London Underground. That was his fascination with Amersham. And here, Nathan will probably recognize this is one of our ex-students from many, many, many years ago in the Art Foundation. And I met her, photographed her in the room, and she's there talking about her dad's bakery. So this is what the gallery looked like. It was almost like a takeover for several weeks. You can see the original Tudor building in there, and we actually stuck the pictures with using vinyl and so on all around the gallery space, so it wasn't just in one particular room. So yeah, we took it over. It was supposed to be for 3 weeks, but the visitors loved it so much, and they had never seen this much footfall that they asked me to extend it by another 2.5 months. So we ended up keeping the work up for much longer. And I've been in talks with them. All this is going to go hopefully on their website soon. They're trying to just set it all up. So final slide there, things I've written rather than, made. That reading for photography I submitted for the 2014 ref, got a wonderful 4-star rating, and also won an international choice award for the best academic text, which I was very, very proud of. And this one more recently, 2019, with colleagues Elsa, whom I asked to contribute to the book. And so it's a very different kind of book because it's, tailored for an educational audience. So yeah, that's a bibliography, and I'm done. So